Hey guys, this is your host Dave Mellon with Valor Fire Training for our next episode of Q&A with Corley Moore. How you doing, man?
Doing great, brother. Excited.
Yeah, no, I'm so excited for this. I'm so happy to have you on. I've been watching your podcast and your talks on YouTube, Facebook, and YouTube. It has been awesome, man. So, for those that don't know you, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Kind of tell them who you are, what you do, and what you're all about.
Corley Moore, 24 years at the Moore Fire Department, which I always have to say is no relation. My name's on the side of all the trucks. I tell people that. Currently a battalion chief, shift commander, basically for green shift, C shift, depending on where you're from. But yeah, I'm a guy that loves fires. I love learning about fires, love reading about fires, love studying fire. I run Firehouse Vigilance, and you mentioned the Weekly Scrap, my podcast. Other than that, man, I just love the byline is never ending fight against complacency. And that's my passion, is just fighting complacency in any way, shape, or form. Because I think it's the number one enemy we face as firefighters. So that's in a nutshell, kind of me.
Yeah, no. And I was truly humbled. I came down to teach at Midwest City a few months ago, and without knowing, you happened to show up to one day of my class, and you walked in and I said, well, that guy doesn't look like he's part of the group, but okay. And, you sat down and took your mask off, and I was like, oh my God, that's Corley Moore. I mean, it was like, I get humbled all the time, man. It's so funny because I'm a nobody from nowhere. And so it was really cool to have you in the class, and you were asking questions, and there was some good dialogue back and forth. So I want to thank you for coming to the class. It was fun having you there.
Oh, hey, it was a solid class. I took stuff back and we used it in our next Tactical Tuesday training that we did on a Mayday RIT scenario.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And then, of course, Brian Brush, it's the 6 degrees to Brian Brush. That's the whole reason I showed up is he texted me the day before and said, hey, I've got David Mellon coming in to teach Mayday RIT class. He's teaching the next 3 days. Can you come? And I was like, heck yeah. So,
dude, it would have been information that would have been helpful to have before you came, because then I was like, why is he here? Wait, who called him? How does he know that I was teaching? But yeah, Brian told me afterwards that he had let you know, and we had people kind of popping in all 3 days, so it was cool.
Oh, he's such a connector, man. He's yeah, and it was a great class, like I said. So I really appreciated getting to catch it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked kind of off camera a little bit about this question. I got a email from a guy named Joel. And he didn't put what department he's with, but I'm going to assume it's on the East Coast, and you'll find out why here in a second. But I'll read you the question. So it says, I am a newly promoted lieutenant on a department that runs approximately 700 calls per year, including an EMS unit. A few months ago, we had a confirmed fire in a single-story home around 3 a.m. The home was a standard 2-story with a basement. Upon arrival, the home had heavy fire from the second-story windows on the number 1 side. That's how I know they're from the East Coast, because nobody in the Midwest or on the West Coast says number 1, number 2, number 3. So for those of you that don't know, we say, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. They say 1, 2, 3, 4. So he said that there was heavy fire coming out of the second story on the 1 or A side of the fire, and also had fire on side 3, which would be the rear or Charlie side. Everyone was confirmed out of the home, so I directed my crew, which was made up of mostly younger members, to make entry and attack the second floor while I secured utilities. Once I made it inside, I noticed that my crew was still stuck on the stairwell leading upstairs and flowing water. I tried to push them forward, and they said it was too hot to make it any further. It was definitely warm, and he put that in quotations, but not hot in my opinion. We finally made it to the second floor and put the fire out. After talking to the crew members, they stated that they felt it was unsafe to go any further, and I will take their word for it, but in years past, I don't think crews would have stopped. What advice would you give someone in my shoes to get them more comfortable with well-involved fires, and what advice would you give them moving forward in the future?
That is a long and great question, man.
Yes, it has many facets, but I was like, this is perfect. I mean, it's very articulate. It gives a lot of information. And so, yeah, what are your thoughts?
It's a perfect question, because it represents one of the greatest problems facing the modern American fire service. And that is the ability to set up realistic expectations through realistic training for our recruits or young guys, the guys coming into the service. They probably really thought it was hot compared to that they'd seen before.
Right.
And so I think that is probably, The 5 questions for firefighters every week is what's the number one issue facing the modern fire service? And I think the number one issue is the lack of realistic training.
Yeah.
So overcoming that is something that is there's no easy snap your fingers, here's the fix. It is a mindset. It is an attitude. It is top to bottom cultural change to get an acceptance of this is what we have to do. This is what we have to overcome. These are the challenges we face so that we can prepare for these, time compressed, high consequence decision-making processes that we are going to be forced to be in at some point in our career.
Yeah. So let's start, we'll kind of break this down. So let's start with the lieutenant. So he's newly promoted, moderately busy department, right? 700 calls a year. I don't know if that's the whole department or just his unit or how it works. But, what would you say to him, as a battalion chief talking to a lieutenant about how to talk to his crew? What would you tell him to do to get them to be more comfortable with well-involved fires?
Ideally, I'm gonna back up on it and say, if he's my lieutenant and I'm his battalion chief, then we started way before this fire, hopefully getting that mindset right. So qualify it there that he's already been set up for, hopefully by me, success, and hopefully he's been setting his crews up for success. But that being said, let's say I just promoted into this position and he's coming to me with this problem and we're brand new at this. And number one, right out the get-go is it has to be the mindset change from him to them of this is how we are going to address training from now on. Nothing to do with you guys. I wouldn't even address the issue or the incident saying, hey, you guys failed here. You guys didn't live up to the you weren't kicking in doors and saving babies. You guys failed. I would avoid that completely and make it more about hey, this is going to be our mindset moving forward. We're going to challenge ourselves every chance we get in the training ground, at the training facility if we have one, hopefully at the tower, at the drill tower, stretch and hose. We're going to push ourselves so that no matter what life throws at us, no matter what emergency scene throws at us, we've taken those basics and taken those off the table. And those are not something we have to worry about when it gets there. We're not going to worry, is this too hot? Because, and again, man, temperature's a tough one with all of the restrictions on live fire training, that is a tough one to overcome. But I think if you can start with the mindset and go from there and then start to get that shift. And it's tough because the question is a great, very detailed question, but like, how much training do they do? Before this, obviously how many fires do they make? Obviously, if they're thinking that's warm and he's saying it's not, then there's some sort of discrepancy there for sure. And how do you overcome that?
Well, and I think there's and I want to back up to more of a, 10,000 foot view. I am very involved in, turnout gear specs for our departments, and I have been for years. And one of the things as an instructor, as a company officer, and just wholly as a firefighter, I have had a super huge issue with the fact that over the last 10 to 15 years, our fire training has become less realistic. And our turnout gear has become more heat resistant.
More, yes.
And so, we have this, influx of like, okay, wait a minute. So we're making fires less hot during training. And I'm not talking for those of you that, because listen, I know this is going to piss some people off, right? I already know that this is going to make some people mad. We don't want to melt helmets during training. I'm not talking about melting helmets during training. What I'm talking about not doing is having 250 degree thermocouples that turn on the fan and suck all the heat out. And it's a propane fire that goes out at 250.
Or people thinking that 250 is hot.
Right.
At the ceiling, sorry.
Yeah, no. And
the other part of, and I don't want to interrupt you too much.
No, go for it.
It's the saturation point. It is more protective until it's saturated, and then it's not,
Yes.
So it's a big problem. Sorry. So
yeah, no. And that's the thing is, we all know as instructors, and I've never shied away from throwing myself under the bus, but as instructors, I've gone into the propane, live fire scenarios, and I don't usually put on a hood. I'll put on my mask and I'll put on my helmet and I'll put on all my stuff, but I want to be able to hear what the students are saying. I want to be able to hear what's going on. Because where we're at and the temperatures that we're exposed to are not anywhere near what's going to be harmful to us. Sure. So, if I can go in there without a hood on, that's not realistic. And now you're throwing in better gear with more heat resistance up to the point where it's saturated. It just sets yourself up for such a horrible situation, which is kind of like this. I would venture to say that a lot of these younger members on the crew are probably just out of the academy or within the last few years. They probably have newer gear. And so for them, they've never experienced that, holy crap, it's really warm. Right. Whereas people like you and I, who have been around for a little bit longer, we've had those, ooh, you take a breath and you're like, ooh, that kind of singed my nose hairs. Right. Like it's, whew, that's getting a little tingly. So we know what hot is. I mean, we've been there. I've been to the point where I wanted to crawl inside my helmet because it felt like I was about to burn up. So yeah, I definitely think from a training aspect that is kind of the role that we've created. What do you think? And I'm going to ask you as a battalion chief again, what do you think the key is to being able to prepare your people for that? Do you think it's having the conversation? Do you think it's hands-on training? Do you think that it's sending them to outside training, or do you think it's all of it?
I think that when you got to the end and said all of it, I'm checking that D box, that all of the above. But I definitely think, it starts the actual German is at the kitchen table, the coffee table with those discussions, and especially with the young guys and saying, man, get to this conference, here, depending on where you're at, I say this all the time, you can throw a rock and hit a conference with some great hands-on training. But you got to start that conversation, and you have to make it, what's the word? Accepted, encouraged, supported to go to those, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I think that starts at that kitchen table and those cups of coffee and shutting down the negativity when people do bring it up, depending on where you're at. Hopefully everybody's blessed and works at a department where there's no negativity, no complaining, no fighting against change. But that's not the American Fire Service that we know and love.
There's two things that we hate: change and the way that things have always been.
That's it, man. So that encapsulates it. So I think, like you said, if you pick it, I think it's all of it, man. Especially like those magical departments you hear about, the colonies, the Midwest cities, I don't want to, I hate when I start rattling off names and I leave things out. So,
right.
But it's when the chief at the top is supportive and plugged in and it goes all the way down. You know what I'm saying? You hear the water boils from the bottom and things like that. Well, that's where the heat's applied on a stove, but water can boil from anywhere, depending on where that heat's coming from.
Sure.
But I do like the analogy that, hey, you don't have to be at the top to make a change. I get the analogy, but I digress. As long as it's boiling, that's the key, man. And so it starts at the kitchen table. It is a mindset. It is you mentioned Mark Von Oppen earlier. He says cultural change is not a war, shock and awe campaign. It's a war of attrition.
Yes.
And that's what it is getting those young guys, getting their mindset right. And then over time, they will be going to those conferences. They will be doing that hands-on training. They will be, getting down to the training ground and stretching that hose, if you can get their minds right and get that cultural change to take effect. So long rambling answer there.
No, I mean, listen, man, we're only like 15 minutes in, so we got plenty of time. Yeah. So, and that's okay. So I want to talk specifically about 1403 and some of the stuff that has been coming up here lately. Do you guys do a lot of acquired structures, or how do you guys do fire training down there?
Right now, we are in the process. We are hopefully in the next couple of years, we're going to rebuild a new training facility. So we are in a limbo between our old, out of date, which was torn down, and our new, which is coming, which is going to be in. The vision is state of the art. I don't know if you've seen Owasso up there, but man, their thing is amazing. And so we're going to aim for something like that. Now, whether we get it or not is up to the taxpayers. And, there's a lot going on.
Sure.
So right now we are in what we call the make do training. We are doing a lot of 4x8 OSB mazes covered up with a lot of fake smoke, a little bit of smudge pots.
Yeah.
So, but it like we said, it's our make do training for, ideally, the tax pass, we build the awesome training facility and we're back in business at what is good. But right now it's make do. Hardly any acquired structures. Big reason why Moore itself, it's completely encapsulated by Norman and Oklahoma City on all sides. And we have when I first hired on, we had quite a bit of rural area, but it's all gone now.
It's just wall to wall.
Yeah, it is. And so there really is no old acquired structures to be had.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, that's kind of where we're at as far as how we handle it. And it's, like I said, make do, overcome the challenge training.
Yeah. Well, and I think from an instructor standpoint, it's very interesting to look and see kind of how we've come to where we're at with the fire training. When I started out, we had masonry type buildings that were the burn buildings, and they were 3, 4, 5 stories. Each room was a burn room. I can remember walking in there, and the the bricks or the blocks are all pitted and marred.
Yeah.
And it's like, man, what the hell did they burn in here? And
Right.
it was couches and tires and so I mean, it was crazy. It was probably the dumbest thing we ever did as a fire service, but it put out some really high fidelity training that let people know exactly what they were going to get into. And so now today, you fast forward, there is a good mix of gas props. There's a good mix of Class A burns. And what I've found is a lot of departments out there that are doing Class A live fire. They use the burn packages. So they make the TP with the pallets.
The pallets, right.
And they'll put a little bit of straw in there. And my issue with that is that you get these really high heat release rates with very little smoke. So it's a very clean burning fire. You get a lot of heat. There's a lot of thermal kind of chilling up at the ceiling, but it's almost tricking the students.
Sure.
They don't get that thermal layer. They don't get that smoke.
It's the training scars. I mean, it literally is.
Yeah.
But at the same time, go ahead. Sorry.
No. And I was just going to say to that point is that, when we as a training area, as a training group, started using more OSB. And for those of you that don't know, NFPA was trying to, or at least considering banning OSB. Really? Yeah, they were planning on banning it, and they were using some studies that looked at the chemicals that were coming off of it and the cancer hazard and all that good stuff. But you cannot get the smoke replication from pallets and straw that you get from OSB. And so when we started doing OSB fires, we had significantly less heat. So, I mean, you're talking 400, 500, 600 degrees, but just nasty chugging black smoke.
Chugging.
I mean, to the point where you're like, man, I almost don't want to go in and put this out. This looks cool as hell,
Right.
And you'd get the streamers coming through the fire. You'd have the fire rolling over your head down the hallway. And so it gave such a more accurate and realistic view of what the fire was like. And so, I'm going to ask you, when you started out in the fire service, how did you guys train compared to today?
I would say that it was a lot more individually driven as opposed to standard driven. And I think that's probably one of the biggest changes is if you had a go-getter that was a company officer, then you went and did what he, and I'm going to back up on my answer and talk about the rise of the internet in mine and your career, the rise of social media, good and bad. But if there's one thing you can definitely say is you can no longer plead ignorance on stuff, because there is just a ton of information on anything you could possibly want to know on any fire related topic, from someone who doesn't know what they're talking about all the way up to, someone who did it for 40 years at the FDNY. And it's vetted, so if someone posts something that is asinine, it gets called out. You know what I'm saying? And you have no excuse for saying, well, I saw this on insert website here, and this is what we're going to do. And then people are like, why the hell are we doing this? There is no reason that you cannot vet the information that is out there and find stuff that is highly vetted, for lack of a better term. I'll quit using the same term over and over. And then, and that's mainly what has changed in my career from the beginning is, if there was someone who believed in something, whether it was, a 90 gallon per minute fog nozzle, that was what, we did, because there was nothing to come in and say other than anecdotal or my opinion or the fights at the kitchen table. Now you can go, see gallons per second and learn all about, big drops of water and Brian Brush and there's no excuse now for ignorance. I think that's the biggest difference. And so, and it's also part of the younger generation coming in. You get a young guy fired up who does get online and check stuff, and you try to pull, I don't even say pull, but you try to train something that is not vetted. Yeah. That's not true. Kurt Isaacson said, he just made his 7th fire today, and so that's, to me, I don't know if I answered the question. The difference is the amount of information that isn't used, but is available.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, when we look at I've spoken about him several times, but my first fire instructor who taught my Fire One class, he was a no bullshit kind of guy. He didn't put up with stuff. It was his way or no way. And he would tell you, if you think you have a better way of doing it, you show me and we'll try it, and I'll show you that my way works better. And for the life of me, we tried and tried and tried. I mean, there were tons of things. I'm like, this hose load sucks. We could do this better. And he's like, okay, prove it. And we did it, and we failed miserably.
That's awesome, man. See, why can't just embrace that? Say, hey, show me the better way.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, and here's the thing though. He was right. Like,
no, I get it. I get it.
You know?
No, but here's my question. Was there ever a point where you guys proved him wrong and he accepted it, or was it all, he was always right?
I think we had some small wins. I mean, we had some small wins with him.
Did he accept it, or was his?
No, yeah, he was totally accepting. Okay. Like I remember.
That's all I'm saying, man. That's perfect. Go.
I remember distinctly, we were going in to do a live fire in a Connex box. And I remember he kept saying, you got to open that fog up, get that steam going. And I kept saying, man, this doesn't make any sense. Like, why would I want to steam burn myself?
Right.
And so very quickly, anecdotally, we figured out, and empirically, that if you kept the nozzle on a straight stream, it didn't drop the thermal layer on you. And so every time my crew would go in and do the fire attack, we'd leave that thing perfectly on a straight stream, and he'd be slapping us on the back of the helmet, open it up, put it on a fog,
get that power cone.
Yeah. And so, I mean, again, this is like early 2000s.
Sure.
But once we explained it to him, and he was like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. But, just when you go to do the state test, make sure you open it up on the fog, and,
right.
Okay, cool. But yeah, so I agree with you that the information, and I've had it before where I'm saying something, and in the meantime, somebody's looking it up on their phone and they'll call me out on it. But I also think that as we've moved forward into today's American Fire Service, because of the amount of information, it has pulled us in so many different directions.
Yes.
When you talk about a manufacturing company who takes the time to invest and get the statistics and the data and the research, and then they put something out on social media. It used to be very regionalized. Smoothbore was on the West Coast and the East Coast. Now it's everywhere. Yes. Because we all have that information. So yes. I feel like sometimes there's too much available information, and sometimes that drowns out what the real focus should be.
You're not wrong. And I love, and I reference it quite often. Elkhart's, we're drowning in information, starving for wisdom. And I'm sure I bastardized that quote in some way, shape, or form.
I think you actually said it right.
That would be a first. I get the gist of it right, but yeah, I think you nail it right on the head, man. And the problem with the sheer amount of information is that it's almost like when you hear religious people argue with the Bible. You can take the Bible and prove your point. You know what I'm saying? You can take this data and you can prove your point by being biased. Is that the right?
Yeah.
So it's. You're not wrong 100%. And that's where I'm one of my current projects is this. I say projects, I have quarterly projects all the time that I'm working on. And I know Dave is the same way. Dave has
I got Dave projects.
And so, but it's this idea of, is it better to be effective or right? And because the ego wants to be right. It wants to be validated. It wants to be, I'm right here. Okay. But right doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be effective. And so I'm really working on this idea of effective versus right. And that's where, if you can focus on being effective, you can, in theory, analyze that data and find out what is the best answer, as opposed to, I need to be right here,
Yeah.
And so
what I love is you look at, and I'm going to name drop a few people. So you look at Dennis Laguerre, you look at Brian Brush and Justin Mann, you look at Elkhart Brass, you look at all the people that are intricately involved in, we already knew the information that they brought to us, but they figured out the science behind it and they put it out there for everybody to learn from. And so there were so many people, like when Brass Tacks Hard Facts came out, there were so many people that they'd walk by and be like, I freaking knew it. Yes. I knew it. And now I have the data to back it up. And it's like, yeah, no, I get it. So, getting back to Joel's question, like, how do I make them more comfortable with well-involved fires? I think it starts with having the expectations set and explaining to them, like, hey, that fire that we were on, it really wasn't that hot. Like, I know it felt hot to you guys, but here's why. And now they understand that
The why, yeah.
they've basically been lied to about what fires are really like, because
No,
maybe
you're
they don't
right.
know that.
And
Um, Go ahead.
no, I'll hold. I'll hold. You're making a great point. Go ahead.
No, so I mean, now they know that they've kind of been smoke and mirrored, and so now you can kind of start with a clean slate. Like, okay, they're going to question everything that they learned up until that point. So now we can start saying, okay, hey, there's a live fire class going on the next town over next week. Why don't we go as a crew, or why don't we send a couple people over there? And if it's going to be more realistic training, let's get them in there so that they can see what those things are like. And then by doing that, you're actually getting them to understand in a very rapid way kind of what you and I have already learned in our careers, which is you can be hot and still move forward.
No, and especially when you're holding the answer in your hands,
Right.
to that heat, and that's probably one of the biggest things, man, is open that bail, and you'll be able to move forward. You know, now I can't. Again, it's such a broad problem as far as the American Fire Service and realistic training. The Class A fire, and even with the OSB, the Class A fire and the Type 1 construction. How do you emulate, what we basically fight all the time, which is Class C fires and Type 5 construction? Is the bread and butter of what we're going to do, and how do you emulate that? Not to mention, because carcinogens are real. They're not. It's not
Right.
like they don't exist. We can't just say, well, screw it, let's burn some tires and crawl into it and soak our gear.
Right.
I will never be a clean cab advocate ever, and but I am a clean gear advocate, and there's a difference. And so, yeah, to me, it's just such a, how do you overcome it? And it is culturally, you have to say, we are going to embrace these challenges as a department. And if it's as a crew, because it's not there yet in your department, we're going to embrace these challenges. We're going to overcome them. We're going to make sure that we are ready by doing this, by keeping it as realistic as possible, by, okay, they won't, our chief says no to this. We can't do this. Our chief says we can't go to that. We're going to do this. And I know I'm saying this like this vague thing, but
Right.
it's so specific to the department. For Joel, it's like you said, getting their understanding that wasn't that hot. It guys, look, without, and again, you can't challenge your manhood and get them to check out and say, you guys are a bunch of wussies here.
Right.
Maybe some of them will respond to that, but the main thing is the mindset, the cultural mindset of, no, we're going to push down these hallways. Keep fire in your life. I think it's Ray McCormack, man, one of the greatest sayings ever. Keep fire in your life. Valor Fire Training. YouTube is a perfect example of all of the sheer amount of helmet cam footage and things you could use. Yes, you're not going to feel the heat. You're not going to feel the saturation, but you could start inoculating your mindset towards what it's going to be and feel like in there, and sit and discuss them. You know what I'm saying? Even if you can't get into the chunky smoke and push in a Connex box.
Yeah.
So,
well, and
anyway.
I love what you said about not challenging their their perception of what it was. And the men and women who are coming into the fire service right now, it is hard. And I found myself, even though I don't consider myself to be halfway through my career or over halfway through. I mean, it's kind of hard to say that and be like, holy crap, I am halfway through my career. But it is hard for me not to be like, are you effing kidding me? Like, what are they doing? Are they not putting water on this fire? Like, it's so hard for me not to get upset. But then you have to realize, and I've said this time and time again, we created this situation as a fire service. We did this to them. So it's not their fault. We can't tell them, you suck because you're not doing your job right, because that's how we trained them.
And you nailed it right out the gate when you were talking about, letting them know, hey, this isn't your fault that you think that's hot. It is all the training you've been through, and making them understand that training is has let them down to this point.
Yeah.
So you said that earlier, and I should have, capitalized, but that is the key right there is, guys, this is not your fault. You thought it was hot, but it's not hot. And here's why you thought it was.
Right.
So let's move forward from here and understand that's not hot.
Absolutely. So the second part of this question says, what advice would you give? Okay. So that was what would you give me as far as advice? And then what advice would you give them moving forward in the future? So take yourself out of that battalion chief to the lieutenant position. What would you want the lieutenant to tell the crew, or what would you tell the crew after that situation moving forward?
Well, I think we've danced around and talked about it quite a bit, and I think one of the best things you've already said is letting them know, like we just talked about, letting them know that, hey, to this, if you thought that was hot, we've let you down, and we are not going to let you down again. So from this point forward, this is how we're going to approach training. Next shift, we're coming in, we're getting our gear on, we're doing this, we're going down to the training tower, we're throwing this OSB in there. You guys are going to see some chunky smoke if it's available.
Right. Yeah. If you're able to do it.
Right. And if not, then hey, if Joel is serious about it, then jump on the internet, jump on Facebook, jump on the Google, and start looking for, revolutionary fire tactics of the lake. How far away is that? How many guys could get to go? Let's get down to HROC, or water on the fire. How far away is that? I don't know where Joel's at, out to firemanship on the way. And again, they're everywhere, and they're good, and they have top-notch instruction and top-notch hands-on training. And the guy, you can just, at any department when you go, you can spot the guy who goes to conferences, because he has so much knowledge has been invested to him by taking himself and putting him in that situation, And so if that would be my main advice to Joel, is be the example and leader of saying, guys, here's this conference. Let's figure out, let's see if, hey, the department has this much money and training to send the guys to conferences. Let's fill out the paperwork. Yeah, it's a pain in the ass. It's 14 documents we have to fill out and get the per diem and all that stuff, but let's do it, and let's go. But if they don't, then they say, hey, let's take the money out of our pockets and let's go. Yeah. And I promise they will never regret it. Yeah. I've never heard anybody come back from a conference and say, man, I wish I hadn't gone to that one.
I've heard people come back from conferences and say, man, I wish I wouldn't have done this or that at that conference. Sure. But I've never heard anybody come back and complain that they went to the conference as a whole. But yeah, and I want to touch on one thing, because I kind of have a standard, and this came from me helping instruct fire classes, right? Like Fire 1, Fire 2, hazmat awareness, hazmat ops. When I got people who had come back from that, I would sit them down and I would just say, okay, listen, men and women, boys and girls, here's kind of what you just went through, right? Like, you got the bare bones basics,
right?
The most generalized experience that you're ever going to get in the fire service, right? The same book that's used in Kansas is the same book that's used in Oklahoma. It's the same book that's probably used in Washington State. It's the same one that's used in Florida. Everybody has different, materials, but whether you're using IFSA, Jones and Bartlett, whatever, it's all generalized because it has to go to so many people.
Right. So many different facets. Yes.
Yeah. And so, you're going to get taught to search the same way. Everybody's going to hold ankles. You're going to get taught to flow water the same way, with your hand up against the person's back like this, instead of getting your shoulder up in there. So it's our responsibility. And that's what I always explain to them is, you've made it past the book phase. We're going to start teaching you how to be firefighters in a more realistic way. Right. So we don't expect you to hold ankles. We don't expect you to put your hand in somebody's back. We don't expect you to do these things, because that's not really how we do it.
Right.
And I have found in my experience as a company officer that when we get these people back from the academies and I make those points to them, it's almost like I'm wiping the slate clean, but they're still retaining those skills. They still know how to use an axe and a Halligan. They still know how to climb a ladder. They still know how to do the really important stuff, but they go, okay, so I don't have to crawl around on my hands and knees, even if I can see all the way across the room.
Right.
Cool.
I don't have to be the human centipede on the search. Yeah,
exactly. So, I don't know how many people do that, but that would be my recommendation, to sit down with these newer, younger firefighters and say, okay, listen, from today on, we're going to start over and we're going to talk about some stuff. And I love your idea of just getting them into those conferences, getting them into those classes, and letting them know that it's okay that they stopped on the stairs, but we want to make sure that next time they feel more comfortable with what they're doing.
No, 100%. And taking pride in it. That's the other part, is you can engage that pride in the young men and women that want to do this job. Dude, that will take care of a ton of it. We talked earlier about training scars, and I want to, so many times instructors, and I know this is not you, but they get the fire rolling, they get it going, they get it chugging, and it's like, don't put it out, don't put it out. We got it going. And that's the mindset part of it, where as Joel, I would want to get with my crew and say, look, guys, it's work to reset this fire and rebuild it and get it back to that point. It's work, but that's why we're here. That's what we're going to do every time. Not, don't put it out, and rob, ingrain bad habits into so that mindset is what I'm talking about. If no, we're going to do it right each and every time until these basics are just rote skills to us, and we destroy them. And it's that mindset. And then they take that pride in the next time they are sitting on those stairs and they push right on up down the hallway, hit the seat, and they're slapping backs and high fiving. And then that pride, and that's the key of it is, hey, if we put in the work, I promise you won't be in that situation again. But it has to be all of us. And the other part is engaging them in, like, they're young, they don't know anything, but they have these, like you say, these all just sitting around. Guys, if you find stuff, bring it to me. Let's go over it as a crew. Let's discuss it. Let's dig into it. Challenge them to bring stuff to you that you've never seen, and get your, you don't have to be the one that knows everything, and let them know that it's okay. Hey, bring a video and do your homework so that you're not caught with your pants down.
Yeah.
You're not caught trying to bluff your way through something with these young kids. So,
well, and I think it's so important too. And when we were talking earlier about the goal of what our training is, and the goal, because the training side of this is really what this comes back and relates to. Like, yeah, there's individual things, maybe somebody has a higher pain tolerance or a lower pain tolerance than somebody else. But when you go back and look at the training, and I'll go back to when we were at Midwest City, you kind of saw how we do our trainings, and they're almost always the same. It's, we take the students, we teach them a skill, we let them get proficient with it, and then they're teaching each other.
Yeah.
And they're going through, and they're actually, no, they're not standing up in front of the class, giving the lecture, doing all that stuff. But when you talk about how to get the firefighter out of their gear, or how to drag them with different straps, or how
getting
to
that AED on, and everything. Yes,
exactly. Let them go through it, let them kind of fiddle around with it until they get comfortable, and then say, okay, you go teach that group, and then that group's going to come over here and teach you the airway stuff. And so when we get that mastery of skills, I really feel like, as these students, our main goal should be, as instructors, company officers, chiefs, we want them to be independent thinkers. And if I can sit there and show up on scene and do my job and not really have to question what anybody else is doing, because I automatically have faith that they're going to make good decisions.
Oh yeah.
That makes our lives so much easier.
Oh yeah.
So much easier. Yeah. So as a battalion chief, I'm sure when you see, like, and you don't have to answer this, but I'm sure that there's, at some point, there's a crew and they say that they're on scene. You're like,
not my crews.
Right. Yeah. Of course not. Of course.
Right.
Not. But yeah, I mean, there are times where I've pulled up on scene and I say, hey, 2161's on scene, and you just hear this long pause, and I'm like, oh, they don't trust us. They don't know what we're about to do.
Yes. No, 100%. And like you said, this all comes back to training. Joel's question all circles back around to realistic training and the attitude towards training. And the biggest thing is multi-company drills is such a huge deal for building that trust. Yes, you can do your company standards, company officer, he only controls his own crew, but get with that next house over. If you're a small department, one station, get with that next jurisdiction over.
Yeah.
And do those multi-company drills, because nothing will replace, except for the real deal. Nothing beats training for building trust in what each other are capable of.
Yeah.
Especially when you can have the discussion of, okay, what did we just do right? What did we just do wrong? How can we do it better?
Well, and just a quick side note, I want to throw this out there because I think it's really interesting. I was taught a long time ago by a fire captain that I have looked up to my entire life. And he said, anytime you're on the fire ground, it's always please and thank you. And if you're a boss, it's always first names. And I was like, man, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but okay, that's fine. And I watched him do this stuff. And so as I've kind of progressed through my career, when I'm on fires, I'll do I call them meet and greets, but you're on a stairwell or you're going down a hallway and you run into another crew, and, I'll pop up and I'm like, hey, Corley, what do you guys got? Like, what do you need? And, you might ask me to do something. I'm like, all right, hey, I'm going to come down this hallway. Can you guys move to the right, please? And it's one of those things where it is so different when you're having that type of conversation,
right,
then, only what I can imagine was going through Joel's head in the stairwell. Like, what the,
Get your asses up the stairs.
Yeah. What are you doing? And so it literally, as hard as it is sometimes, and don't get me wrong. I mean, if shit's hitting the fan, I don't expect myself or anybody else to be like, excuse me, everyone, can you please move to the right so I don't burn to death?
Right.
That's not what I'm talking about. But yeah, I mean, when you sit there and you kind of tone it back for a second and you say, hey, Corley, what do you need? What do you got? Hey, Dave, good to see you. Hey, this is what we need. Can you guys go upstairs and pull the ceiling? Sure. It brings back that personal aspect of it. And so when you're talking to your crews, and this is me talking to Joel or anybody else that's in his situation, when you're talking to your crews, don't scream, don't yell, don't call them stupid mother effers, whatever you're going to do, don't do that.
Yes.
Hey, Tommy, what is going on? Oh man, it's really hot. Okay, Tommy, listen, hey, give me the nozzle. I'm going to hit it a little bit. We're going to knock it down and we're going to keep going. Okay. Those are things that can defuse that situation. And maybe they would have been able to make it down the rest of that hallway a little sooner had they not been thinking that they were going to burn.
100%. And what I forget who said it, but calm is contagious, and I love that please and thank you, because that right there, if you keep that in your head, like you said, it's not going to always be there, but if you keep that in your head, you're going to be calm, because you don't say please and thank you if you're amped up.
I've been told by multiple people that I say please and thank you more on a fire scene than I ever do outside of the fireground. Like
I want to try and work that in. I really am. I like the first name deal also. So
I mean, I say please and thank you to most people. I mean, I'm a courteous person, but everything is please and thank you. And it's just, it brings back that personality instead of it just being this frantic screaming, yelling, because we've all been there. We've all been on firegrounds where it's frantic and people are yelling at each other.
Well, and the frantic is just as contagious as the calm. If those guys on those stairs are getting warm and in their mind, they're getting hot, they're getting burnt, in their minds, even though that's far from reality. When you come up there and start screaming at them, you're just adding to that franticness, that the chaos of that situation. Whereas opposed, if you come up and nice, calm, cool, and collected, hey guys, let's please push on up the stairs. Let's get some water flowing. We'll be good here. At least they start looking around going, well, maybe this isn't as bad as we think. If Dave's behind us saying, please,
right. It's not as bad.
It's not as bad as we think. Okay. Let's do this. And it's that either one's contagious. Which one are you going to bring to those stairs?
Absolutely. Now there's one other question I want to ask you, and it's not actually,
I'm loving this, by the way, man. It's a great format.
Thanks, man. It's super laid back. Like I keep telling everybody, it's supposed to be like you're sitting at a kitchen table and you're just BSing. That's kind of what it is.
One thing I got to say is I can't wear a pink shirt on camera anymore.
I believe it's called salmon.
Okay.
I believe it's called salmon. And yes, you it must be warm down there in Oklahoma.
I guess the heater's turned on, but I'm so nervous to talk to Dave Mellon and Valor.
Oh, please. Oh, please.
So, all right. Sorry. Go ahead.
So this is actually addressed in this question, but I really want to bring it up because I think it's a bigger issue that maybe, is worth some discussion. So when I became a captain, I inherited, personnel. They were all there existing when I got promoted. So, with this company officer, with Joel being newly promoted, he got moved to this station, or if he was already at the existing house, he inherited these people. So what was his interaction with them prior to this? Because it couldn't have been that this is like their first fire, right? So, what do you expect as a battalion chief, or when you were moving up through the ranks? I tried to sit down with everyone and kind of get their expectations of me as well as my expectations of them. But I also sat down with the other company officers and I'm like, all right, tell me about your problem children. Tell me about the people that are the not go-getters.
Right.
Tell me about the people that are going to do their job and do it right. And I'm not going to have to worry about them. And then I formulate my own opinions, but I still take that to heart. So what do you do on your end? How have you kind of combated that?
I was super lucky in the fact of the mentors I had as company officers were phenomenal, and they invested a lot of time in me. And then early on, in fact, we'll bring back Brian Brush up again. When he was with Edmund Fire, he brought in the Edmund Fire Leadership Conference, and he brought in a guy I'd never heard of named Mark Von Oppen to teach a class, and fully involved. And he had the 10 for you, 10 for me, and that was right at a time when I was promoting to company officer. And that massively shaped, he tells his whole story about sweeping around the kitchen table, just sweeping around. And the guy like, get out, never being told the expectations of what he was expected to do on a fireground. He was told to sweep, make coffee, clean a toilet, and get out of here.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so that really early on stuck with me. And so expectations, and especially fireground expectations, is like day one things with me as a company officer. And now every one of my company officers under me, that's like the day one thing when they get a new rookie assigned to them or they get assigned to a new crew. And it has such an impact. I give it up to Brian Brush and Mark Von Oppen for having that impact. I wonder how many, if they even know how many people they've impacted in that way, in that minor way. And then the other part of it is I love training. I don't, Coastal John Buttrick, Coastal Fire Training, and then his mug that sits on my desk, and it says, "If you don't believe that training is the most important thing, blah blah blah."
Kind of like this one.
Yeah, it's very yes. So it's the original one with the you're one of the worst people that walks on the face of the earth if you don't.
Yeah.
And I believe that, man. Training fixes everything. The book Small Unit Leadership, Dandridge,
Yep.
phenomenal book, but it talks in there. It was written in the time between the Vietnam War and the Gulf War, and it was a time of relative peace as far as American military, and it's the same. The analogy to the fire service is, for him in his book, he was like, how do you keep the guys sharp when there's no war?
Right.
How do you stay? And it's the same. How do you stay sharp when there's no fire? When you're like, fire fixes everything. It's like in the NFL, winds fix everything. I love, but when there's no fire, how do you stay sharp, man? And it's that mindset of we are going to be ready when those tones drop. When it hits, we're going to be ready. And training builds that trust, builds that relationship, and you can't beat it. And so I don't even remember what the question was as I went off on a tangent. So.
No, and no, so you answered it. So, and it's so true because like you said, when you train, it teaches expectations. And when people understand the expectations, you don't have the surprise on the fireground. And, one of the things that was new to me that I actually learned from going to conferences and going around and just being a part of outside of Kansas fire service was, like beaching the fire truck. I didn't even know what that was. I went to a conference and they were talking about beaching the rig, and I go, "What the hell are you guys talking about? Like, what is beaching the rig?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, you pull it up in the yard and you like park it on the yard so that you leave access for the aerial, and then you can still get your lines off." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm not gonna lie, that sounds freaking cool," And so when I brought it back here to Kansas, like our expectation, and I was a lieutenant at the time, but my expectation as a lieutenant, I told my driver, I said, "Hey, if we pull up on a fire, I want you to pull up in the front yard."
He looked at you with the deer in the headlights,
and he was like, "Lou, so you realize that that's going to damage the yard, right?" And I said, "Okay, I'm not talking about if the house has like an automatic alarm going, like a smoke detector going off. I'm saying if we pull up and there's fire blowing out the roof, I want you to beach it in the yard if I tell you to." And he's like, "All right, man, we're probably going to get in trouble for this." I'm like, "Oh, I guarantee you we're going to get in trouble." And so we did, and we did get in trouble. Everybody was like, "What are you doing?" But it was so cool because they understood the expectation. They understood what I wanted, and they understood that because we had talked about it and it was well understood.
Yes,
I was going to back them up. I wasn't going to do it and then be like, "Oh, I never told him to pull on the lawn."
I don't know why he did that. It's
yeah. And
burn this guy down.
Yeah. So, I mean, we don't do it all the time. I mean, we do it more out in the rural area just because we need room for tanker shuttles and stuff like that. But,
sure.
but yeah, it's so funny, man. When we beach a truck in the yard, people are like,
"Yeah,
what are you doing?"
I can only imagine if we beach the rig here. Yeah.
You should try it next, just one time.
What the reaction will be.
Just tell one of your drivers.
We beach the Chiefs buggy all the time just to get it out of the way, but in the area, you know what I'm saying? But that's a way different thing than an apparatus. So.
Oh man. So no, like I said, hopefully that shed some light on Joel's issue. Hopefully it shed some light on, the training thing. We talked about a lot of different stuff. I think the biggest takeaway from this is that, this is really a no blame. This is a no blame type of thing, right? Like there's a lot of different facets that would have caused something like this. Sure. I think the biggest thing is to figure out the root cause and start kind of chipping away at that and moving towards it. And with him being newly promoted, I think that's going to build a lot of crew integrity. What do you think?
No, absolutely. And he can use this as a defining moment for himself. If he doesn't use it outwardly, let them know. But as this will never happen to my crew again. I will not let this happen. And it can become a motivational point and of his crew's identity from that point forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So how can people, okay, so you do the firehouse vigilance.
Yes, sir.
Right. So how can people get a hold of you, watch the podcast, listen to the podcast? How can they do all that?
Okay, so firehousevigilance.com is the main hub that if you want to buy a book or find anything, you can find it all there, but it's on all the social medias, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I don't TikTok, but I'm not good at the arm dancing. But no, the Facebook is where I do the weekly scrap live, and I love having interaction with the audience. So if you want to catch it live, follow Firehouse Vigilance on Facebook, and you can get notified whenever it goes live because it's firefighter schedule. It's never like every Thursday at 8. It's all over the place. So if you want to catch them live, that's where it's fun. But as far after it's done, it gets put into podcast form, and you can find it everywhere from Spotify to iTunes to everywhere you find Valor Fire Trade. I listen to you on Spotify. That's where I find you.
Dude, I'll tell you what, man, as soon as I started putting stuff on this podcast platforms and it just popped up, I mean, you have to go and sign up for all this stuff, but I'm like, oh my God, I'm on Apple. I'm on Apple Podcasts. Yeah. And then I'm like, oh my God, I'm on Google. And everybody else that's been doing podcasts for a long time is like, dude, it's really not that big of a deal. And I'm like, well, it's a big deal to me.
No, it is a big deal. Okay. You don't know. No, absolutely, man. So
yeah.
Yeah. That's it. That Firehouse Vigilance, and you can find it everywhere. And send me messages. I love talking to people. You can ask Dave. We talk all the time and just back and forth.
Absolutely, man. Well, and it's such good content. I mean, there are people that put out content that is more comedy driven or more kind of like lighthearted, joking around, which is great. But, your content is always just these nuggets that get dropped. And it's like the people that are on the show, and when they say stuff, it's just so profound. And so, I love having a good mix. I feel like in today's fire service, we have such a great mix of information, humor, mental health awareness. I mean, it's just so cool.
No, and I'm eternally blown away by whenever like you're coming on the scrap here. What do I have you written down at on April 13th?
Yep, April 13th.
And so I'm continually blown away by the quality of people that agree to come on and talk to me. And I'm sure you feel the same way whenever you
absolutely.
And it's like, you had Dennis Riley on yesterday, I believe, or whenever it was. And it's like, that's just, yeah.
And that was literally like a phone call. I was like, hey, Dennis, what do you want to be on the podcast? And he was like, yeah, sure. When? And I'm like, what are you doing tomorrow? He's like, I don't know. Call me in the morning. We'll figure it out. Like that's how it happened. It was just so cool. And you're right. It's just blown me away.
It's humbling, man, because you get this one-on-one conversation with someone you'd pay $100 to go listen to talk and teach a class for 4 hours,
Yeah.
And so it's, I love it, man. It's one of the funnest things I've ever done. And I've done a lot of fun things, but I will say this, I think it was your episode. I don't even know what episode, but Kyle Romagus.
Yeah.
Dude, that I've suggested that to so that like 2 days before I listened to it, and this was a while back, one of my captains came to me and he was talking about when do you know when to open and flow? He's a new captain. He was just asking a question. How do you know when to open and flow if you're just in there in the dark? And I was like, I listened to that and I said, dude, just go listen to this Romagus and Mellon talk about this because it is so.
Yeah.
I want to say that right now. It is one of my favorite episodes of all fire social media. And I don't say that lightly. Brothers in Battle, whenever they had Aaron Fields on, that was one of the greatest episodes of all time. And then the Romagus Mellon episode. So again, that's a huge compliment. I hope you take
that is so incredibly humbling. Like
it was a great episode, brother. I mean it. So much information.
Well, and thank you. I mean, truly thank you. And man, see, people that know me know that like I'm just speechless right now. So that's terrible.
Like I had my battalion or my deputy chief came in and give me an evaluation yesterday on duty. And I'm so bad at taking compliments. I've had to learn to just say thank you. Because like you just did, it's like, that's all you can do. Because I'm like, I'm really uncomfortable right now.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And that's, and the biggest thing is, and we talked about this off camera. Our biggest thing is, and I say ours because you're in the same boat. I don't do this for money. I don't do this because of fame. I don't do this. I mean, listen, my kids are more excited about the fact that I'm on YouTube than I am. Right. I do this because I want to, even if there's one nugget that can go to one person in one state, in one city, and it helps them put a fire out faster or get a victim out faster or get that promotion, whatever it is, that's my end goal.
Dude, it's awesome, man. It is. And you're doing great at it. I will say even on a selfish side, because I'm with you on that. I love, like I got a message today from somebody out of the blue that said, dude, you're scrap with, who I just had Shane Bentley the other night. And he said, dude, that was such a great scrap. And that's the crazy part is I don't know these people, and you get a suggestion from someone that says you need to have so and so on.
Yeah.
And so I have them on. I'm like, is this going to be a good one or not? Because I'm honestly sometimes really worried. And then they come on and they just crush it. Their passion comes through, and it fires me up. So on a selfish side, it keeps me so motivated.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
anyway, I love it, man.
That's awesome, man. Well, listen, for those of you listening and watching, whether it's on a podcast or watching the video series, so follow Chief Moore on the Firehouse Vigilance. Send him some messages, ask him questions. He is a super, super dialed in chief. As soon as the Rona is gone, I fully plan on coming down and riding with you.
Awesome.
Yeah. Man, that's gonna be a dangerous shift. We're gonna get into all sorts of trouble.
You'll drive. I'll be on the side seat. There we go.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
Don't tell my chief.
I won't tell anybody. We'll delete this part out. So, but no, for everybody watching, thank you again for sending in the questions. Thanks to Joel. Thanks again to Corley for being part of this. And until we talk to you guys again, take care, be safe, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Dave. Had a blast.
All right, man. Take care.